Hello, this is a Toaster Party, and today I'll be talking about Machina Orcust. I've constructed a list that will astound and amaze for under $70. It runs neither Gearsu nor Hyca and it still functions. And unlike Samorg, will actually do well at a regionals. But without further ado, let's move on to the list. Here we are, in all of its budgety goodness. Let's start by talking about the first cards in the deck, that being the Machinas. We have one Citadel because sometimes you can pitch this card off and just making an on-field Raigeki is real strong. We have the combo enablers, Metal Crunch, Megaform, and Irradiator. For those who don't know, there is a combo which involves searching up the Irradiator and Megaform using Machina redeployment, which allows you to pitch Megaform to Irradiator special summoning itself, which then lets it tribute itself to summon back Megaform. Megaform then tributes itself to summon Metal Crunch. Metal Crunch then searches up, or as its requirement requires you to search up 3 Earth Machine monsters, which you just search up every single copy of Scrap Recycler, and even though it's random, it adds one of the random 3 Scrap Recyclers to your hand, meaning that you start on field already with a 2,800 point beater and the ability to normal summon the best normal summon in the deck. Really strong. Also, we have one copy of Machina Fortress and Machina Possessed Storage. These cards aren't really standard for most Machina lists, but Fortress is a good way to discard cards to your graveyard with them, or specifically Orcust cards. And Possessed Storage is just an alternate normal summon that you might want later in the game, just in case you draw into too much of your Machina package and then also grab the redeployment. We also have 2 copies of World Legacy World 1, pretty standard for Orcust lists, 3 copies of Orcust Nightmare, again standard for Orcust lists, 1 copy of the Refrigerator, which is also pretty standard. The problem is you keep drawing it. And then here's like the budget package here. We have 1 copy of Dark Grepher, 1 copy of Armageddon Knight, and 1 copy of Reinforcement of the Army to tie these 2 cards together. The reason why we're running this is basically what we're using to replace Gearsu. And while Gearsu allows you to go into Hyca combo stuff, this deck doesn't run Hyca, so that stuff's not really necessary. So, while Gearsu might have allow for a bit of a higher ceiling, these cards functionally replace Gearsu in budget builds, and there still allows for effective combos. 3 copies of Symbol Skeleton, because, again, we're on a budget and we want to see this card, we're going to loop this card a lot. 3 copies of the best card in the deck. You always want this to be your normal summon, and these cards are just sort of less good versions of this normal summon because you can go into Squap Wyvern combos, which are pretty convoluted. We have 3 copies of Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit because I feel it's the best one to include in the main deck this format right now, at least on a budget. Honestly, there's probably better options, but you can also shave this one off and replace it with Effect Veiler that are in the side. And it'll shave off about $10–15. Next up is Mechaphantom Beast O-Lion, the card that you will normally be sending off Scrap Recycler to store it off your Scrap Wyvern combos. You can honestly also put in Jet Synchron, and it functionally does the same thing. The only upside to using Jet Synchron is that it gets a discard, which also can be a downside. So I'm thinking that you could play either one and it'd be just as fine. 1 copy of Brass Bombard, because sometimes it shows up. Sometimes this card is necessary. 3 copies of Allure of Darkness, because the deck is mostly dark. The 1 Foolish Burial, because we're Orcust. Monster Born, also just a really good card in this deck. 3 copies of what makes running the Machina package worthwhile. More copies of Monster Reborn, and probably the most expensive card in the main deck. Running about $4. Oh yeah. You can pretty much get every single card in this deck for $5 or less. I don't think there is a card in the deck that is more expensive than $5. Orchestrated Babel, which basically allows your combo line to pop on your opponent's turn. Machina Overdrive, a good way to recur, and also a secondary way to get into more disruptions, so it can sort of search up a copy of Citadel on your opponent's turn, which, again, getting a Raigeki out on your opponent's turn, it's strong. And 2 copies of Orchestrated Climax. Some Orcust builders have shaved this card, but the card's still good in this deck, and particularly in this budget build, because it allows you to search up cards during later turns if it gets to those, and just sometimes setting it on turn 1's fine. Now onto the extra deck, 2 copies of the reason we run this deck, because Dingirsu is an amazingly powerful card, and because it's been reprinted in the, I think it was Dual Overload, the card is now super cheap. You can get them for $2.50 each. But they're super worth it, because you can use them as a way to break boards, and as a way to pop stuff on your opponent's turn. You have 2 copies of Galatea. Honestly, I think that there's cards in this extra deck that you could shave off to add another one of these, because this card is just really good, allowing you to set your Babel and on later turns set the Orchestrated Climax. We have the Longirsu, the Orcust Orchestrator. It's a sometimes good card. I usually make it as a way to get the Dingirsu off the field, and its shuffle effect is sometimes relevant. Scrap Wyvern, which allows for insane levels of extension into way more disrupts than the typical Orcust combo. 1 copy of Topologic Bomber Dragon, a sometimes card that you make in conjunction with Longirsu to cause repeated nukes. Another card that also works well in tandem with the Machina Overdrive, because you just pop something down to either of its left or right down facing arrows, and then you nuke your opponent's field again. Borreload, because it's dark. Topologic Zeroboros, because sometimes you need a card that gets really beefy really quick. Live the World Key Blade Master, because you can use its effect to set World Legacy Succession, and the World Wand can sometimes let you activate it. It's a sometimes card. The 6 cards you're making most often in this deck are these first 6 right here, and these next few right here are the sometimes cards. Nightmare Phoenix, because getting rid of back row is good. Link Karibo, just another good generic card that you can use to make the Orcust Brass Bombard live. That's really kind of the only reason it's in there, because it's the only level 1 target. If you want, you can shave this card off in replacement for something else you're just having in your bulk pile. Salamander Almirage, sort of for a similar reason to the Orcust Brass Bombard and for Mecha Phantom Beast O-Line. It makes some dead cards live. Or if you have like World Legacy Succession, there's just like sometimes this will pop up. But again, another card that you could possibly shave. I would honestly keep the Almirage over the Link Karibo. It comes up more often. And these other 2 cards that I have never made. This one's about $3 or $4, so it might be another card you might want to cut. But like, there's a possibility it could show up, so it might be good. Then along with the side deck, you have 3 copies of DD Crow, because you're really siding this in if you're going second, because there's like good ways for this deck to break boards, but this is just an additional way to make sure your opponent's board doesn't get too tough to break. 3 copies of Cosmic Cyclone and 3 Twin Twisters. Cyclone for Mystic Mine and Eldritch, and Twin Twisters mostly for that Mystic Mine thing, and also sometimes good against other back row decks. And then finally, Royal Decree against those pesky back row and trap decks. Hope you enjoyed the list, and should be posting a gameplay vid soon.